When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, the lives of millions of children in the Soviet Union changed in an instant, as the hours before the attack still felt like ordinary summer mornings, filled with the familiar sounds of schoolyards and factories and busy streets. But everything collapsed the very moment the German invasion broke across the western borders, because this was not a typical military conflict, and it was not a distant event that adults alone would shoulder. It was a fast-moving catastrophe that swept directly into the daily worlds of children who had never imagined that war could fall upon them so suddenly and so brutally. Operation Barbarossa was designed not only to defeat the Red Army, but to destroy entire populations. And children were placed at the center of this destruction because Nazi ideology did not view them as innocent or neutral human beings, but rather as targets whose removal would make future resistance impossible. So as German soldiers advanced along the roads of Belarus, Ukraine, and the Baltic regions, the first thing that changed for children was the replacement of safety with fear. A constant, overwhelming fear that took shape in explosions, smoke, gunfire, and sudden disappearances of neighbors and schoolmates. Many accounts preserve the memory of the first hours of the invasion, when German aircraft roared over small towns and villages where children ran outside thinking at first that the planes belonged to the Soviet Air Force, only to see bombs falling moments later, turning quiet streets into rubble. Children watched buildings collapse with their families still inside, and were immediately forced out of the world of childhood and into a new reality where survival replaced play, where silence replaced laughter, and where every day opened with the possibility of sudden death. In Belarus, one of the regions hit hardest by the invasion, many children found themselves hiding underground or in basements, sometimes for days, as their parents tried desperately to protect them from the German killing squads that followed behind the frontline troops. These squads were known as Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units that arrived in town after town, with detailed lists of families to eliminate, especially Jewish families, Roma families, and anyone considered undesirable by the Nazi ideology. For children, this meant that life became an unpredictable nightmare, because unlike traditional battles where civilians might escape combat zones, these squads intentionally sought them out, eliminating entire neighborhoods. And children saw death at an age when most had barely learned to read. Some of the most painful stories come from the children of Minsk, who remembered how the air smelled of smoke for weeks, and how the older children would whisper warnings through the shelters as Germans approached, telling the younger ones not to cry or make noise because they knew that even a single sound could betray their hiding places and bring death upon dozens of people at once. The constant pressure of silence shaped an entire generation of Soviet children who learned to control fear in ways that no child should ever have to learn. When the Germans entered Soviet cities, they arrived with orders that left no room for mercy, and children sometimes witnessed their parents being seized without explanation, leaving them suddenly alone, wandering streets already filled with frightened civilians. German soldiers often separated families at checkpoints, sending children in one direction and adults in another, breaking apart family units that had always been the foundation of their world. The shock of this separation changed the emotional development of many children permanently because they had to learn to survive without the support of a parent, relying instead on strangers, other children, and sometimes on their own instincts. Food shortages became one of the most devastating realities for children as the German invasion disrupted farms, transportation networks, and city food supplies. Even in the earliest months of Barbarossa, hunger spread quickly because Soviet infrastructure collapsed under the rapid German advance, leaving cities without deliveries, stores without bread, and villages stripped of grain either by retreating Soviet forces or by German requisition squads that seized food to support the advancing army. Children often watched their parents divide the last remaining scraps of food, giving most of it to the youngest ones in the family. Yet even this act of protection often failed because the amount of food was simply too small to sustain life. No story of children during Barbarossa can be told without mentioning Leningrad, where the siege turned childhood into a desperate fight for survival because the city was cut off for nearly 900 days. And children received bread rations so small that many fainted in school lines or collapsed on the stairs of apartments as winter cold hardened every wall and every breath. Parents tried to create small shelters inside their homes using blankets, broken furniture, and whatever materials they had. But nothing could stop the cold air that seeped through shattered windows, and thousands of children died simply because their bodies could no longer fight hunger and freezing temperatures at the same time. The Soviet government tried to save as many children as possible by evacuating them eastward toward regions far from the front line, such as the Urals and Siberia. But these evacuations were chaotic and heartbreaking because trains were overcrowded, journeys were long, and many parents had to make the impossible decision of sending their children away, while they themselves stayed behind to work in factories or join the army. Some children remembered how their mothers pushed them onto evacuation trains while holding back tears, promising they would reunite soon, even though both sides feared that such reunions might never happen. Once children reached the east, they faced new challenges as they adjusted to unfamiliar cities, new schools, and substitute guardians, often living with distant relatives or complete strangers who agreed to house them under government programs. Many children struggled emotionally because they had no way to contact their parents, receiving only occasional letters, and some received no letters at all because their parents had already been killed without the news yet reaching them. This emotional uncertainty shaped years of their young lives because they lived every day with the question of whether their family still existed. Not all children were evacuated. Many older children stayed behind either because there was no transportation available or because their parents chose to stay together as a family. In occupied territories, these teenagers quickly learned to take on adult responsibilities, such as gathering firewood, searching for food, or protecting younger siblings. In some regions, especially in Belarus and Ukraine, German occupation forces forced children into hard labor, ordering them to dig trenches, carry supplies, or clean military facilities, and those who refused faced severe punishment. A significant number of children, particularly teenagers, chose to resist. They joined the Soviet partisan movement that operated in forests across Belarus, Ukraine, and Western Russia. These children became scouts, messengers, and couriers because their small size and agility allowed them to move quietly through forests and slip unnoticed through German checkpoints. Although they were young, the dangers they faced were enormous because German troops conducted constant anti-partisan sweeps, burning villages suspected of aiding partisans and killing anyone found with partisan supplies. Many of these teenage fighters died during missions, but others survived the war with memories that remained heavy for the rest of their lives, because no child forgets the moment they had to act like a soldier while still longing for the world of schoolbooks and playgrounds. Children who lived in cities under German occupation experienced harsh restrictions. They were forbidden from attending school in many places because German authorities viewed Slavic education as unnecessary or dangerous. Instead of learning in classrooms, children spent their days waiting in food lines, running errands for their families, or searching through ruins for anything usable. Some children witnessed public executions carried out by German police forces, including the hanging or shooting of suspected resistance members, which left deep psychological scars that shaped their adult lives long after the war ended. In Jewish ghettos established across occupied Soviet territories, children lived under even more horrifying conditions. They faced overcrowding, disease, starvation, and constant fear of deportation. German soldiers and police frequently conducted selections where children were separated from their families and taken away, often never to be seen again. Many children were killed during the liquidation of ghettos, where entire Jewish populations were marched to pits and shot. Photographs and testimonies from survivors describe how mothers tried to shield their children, how older siblings attempted to comfort the younger ones, and how children learned the meanings of life and death far earlier than anyone should. For some children, the war brought not only hunger and fear, but also the complete destruction of their homes. German policies toward Soviet villages were brutal, especially in areas suspected of aiding partisans. Entire villages were burned to the ground, leaving children wandering through ashes, searching for relatives or hiding in nearby forests. Many became orphans overnight and survived only because neighbors or distant relatives took them in. Others were taken by German forces and transported to Germany as forced laborers, where they spent the rest of the war working in factories or farms under harsh conditions. This was the world that Soviet children faced during Operation Barbarossa, a world where education disappeared, where hunger shaped every day, where death was routine, where fear replaced innocence, and where survival depended on quick decisions, silence, and sheer luck. And yet, even in this world of terror, children showed remarkable resilience. Some kept diaries, writing quietly in corners of rooms or hiding in cellars to preserve their thoughts. Others created small communities among themselves, sharing stories or songs to comfort one another. Their strength became one of the quiet miracles of the war, because despite everything, they held on to pieces of humanity, even as the world around them collapsed. The story of Soviet children during Operation Barbarossa cannot be understood fully without examining the different layers of fear, displacement, responsibility, and survival that shaped their daily lives through every month of 1941 and beyond. Because the invasion did not simply bring military conquest, it shattered the entire structure of civilian life. And children stood at the center of this collapse as the most vulnerable, yet often the most resilient witnesses to the war. As the Germans advanced deeper into Soviet territories, children found themselves moving constantly, sometimes with parents, sometimes in groups of strangers, and sometimes entirely alone. Roads across Belarus, Ukraine, and Western Russia were filled with columns of refugees who carried their entire lives on their backs. And within these columns, children walked silently, stepping over rubble, burned carts, dead animals, and sometimes bodies left behind after bombings. They learned quickly that crying or complaining was a luxury they could no longer afford, because every moment of noise risked drawing attention from German patrols or aircraft overhead. And so the natural behavior of childhood was replaced with the instinctive discipline of survival. In villages that had not yet been struck by German troops, children listened to whispers from adults who gathered around radios or returning soldiers who spoke of explosions, tanks, and atrocities. For many of them, the war was first experienced through fear in the voices of their parents rather than through direct violence. But this fear spread quickly as families dug shallow shelters in their gardens, reinforced basements with broken furniture, and kept children indoors, hoping to delay the moment when the Germans would arrive. When the occupation finally reached these villages, children faced rules that made no sense to them. German soldiers forced them to stand in long lines for registration, sometimes marking Jewish children with badges, sometimes ordering them to labor sites, sometimes separating them from their families. Many of these rules were enforced with shouting, beating, or sudden violence, so children learned immediately that disobedience could bring deadly consequences. The occupation turned the simplest actions, walking outside, searching for food, speaking to a stranger, into decisions that could alter their fate. The occupation also disrupted the most basic rhythms of childhood, especially education. Schools closed or were repurposed into German barracks or administrative buildings. Teachers scattered, evacuated, or fled. Textbooks were burned or confiscated. Some children tried to continue lessons informally, gathering in small groups and learning secretly from older students or surviving teachers. But for most, their education ended abruptly and would not resume for years. The absence of schooling did not simply deprive children of learning. It robbed them of structure, routine, and the sense of normalcy that education provides, replacing it with days defined by fear and hunger. Meanwhile, Soviet propaganda continued to spread throughout the regions still under Soviet control, encouraging citizens, including children, to show courage, contribute to defense efforts, and support the Red Army. In cities not yet reached by the Germans, school children collected scrap metal, knitted socks for soldiers, and wrote letters to the front. Posters showed children holding flags and supporting their country with pride. But as the front moved closer and the reality of the invasion became more terrifying, these patriotic messages collided with the experience of flight, hunger, and death. Children became symbols of hope in Soviet messaging, but their actual lives were shaped by exhaustion and trauma. Evacuation trains became the lifeline for millions of children during the invasion. These trains were overcrowded to the point where children sometimes sat on the roof or clung to the sides of carriages, and many were forced to travel for days without food, clean water, or sleep. Inside the carriages, Children huddled together on wooden floors, sharing blankets or pieces of clothing, while adults tried to ration the last pieces of bread. Some children recalled the bitter smell of coal smoke and the constant shaking of the train as the only sensations they remembered from those weeks. These journeys took them to remote regions where factories, schools, and entire government ministries were relocated, creating new temporary communities filled with displaced families and orphaned children. In Siberia and the Urals, the evacuated children were placed in state orphanages, collective farms, or foster homes. Life here was safer than in the occupied territories, but it was still harsh. They had to adjust to unfamiliar environments, long winters, and the absence of their families. Many worked alongside adults in fields, kitchens, or workshops because every able body was needed to support the war effort. Older children became laborers long before adulthood, shaping their identities through responsibility and work rather than play and education. Yet despite the hardship, these regions offered a chance of survival that did not exist on the front lines. Back in the occupied zones, daily life became a test of endurance. Children faced constant shortages. German soldiers frequently seized livestock and stored food. Wells were sometimes contaminated. Markets were shut down. Some children survived by scavenging fields after harvests, searching for kernels of grain that had been left behind. Others waited near German dumping sites, hoping to find scraps of discarded food. This was humiliating and dangerous, but hunger eliminated hesitation. The image of children fighting dogs for scraps of bread became one of the many tragic symbols of the occupation. In ghettos across the occupied territories, Jewish children endured the harshest conditions. They lived in overcrowded neighborhoods with too little food, insufficient medical supplies, and constant fear of deportation. Many lost parents early in the occupation and tried to survive by entering smuggling networks that transported food across ghetto walls. These children crawled through cracks, jumped fences, and used their small size to squeeze through gaps unavailable to adults. They risked their lives every day because German guards frequently shot children caught smuggling food. Some ghettos formed secret schools where children learned in basements lit by candles, listening quietly for footsteps that might signal a German patrol. These fragile moments of learning provided rare emotional relief, but they existed under the constant shadow of possible death. Teenagers who joined the partisans played one of the most significant roles among children during the invasion. These partisan groups formed deep in the forests, often moving camps as German forces conducted anti-partisan sweeps. Many teenage fighters were motivated by revenge after losing their families or seeing their villages destroyed. They learned to use weapons, follow reconnaissance routes, sabotage rail lines, and deliver messages between units. Some worked as medics, carrying wounded fighters through forests at night. Others gathered intelligence from villages, using their age to move unnoticed through German checkpoints. But their involvement was extremely dangerous because the Germans considered partisans, even child partisans, as enemies deserving execution. If captured, these children faced brutal torture and public killings intended to intimidate civilians. German reprisals against villages suspected of aiding partisans had devastating consequences for children. Entire villages were surrounded by German troops, set on fire, and the residents, including children, were killed. Belarus suffered hundreds of such massacres. In places like Katyn, every member of the village except a single child was killed. These massacres spread terror across all rural communities, forcing many families to flee into forests where they lived in makeshift shelters, constantly moving to avoid German patrols. Life in the forest was harsh, especially in winter, but it offered the possibility of survival. Children living in these conditions learned to forage, gather firewood, and blend into the landscape with incredible skill. Children also played a role in preserving family memories during the chaos. Some carried photographs of parents in small pouches, wrapped in cloth to prevent damage. Others hid family documents, expecting that one day someone would survive to rebuild what was lost. Small acts like these connected children to the past, even when everything around them had been destroyed. One of the most painful realities for children during Barbarossa was the loss of identity. Some became separated from their parents during bombings or evacuations and never learned what happened to them. These children grew up not knowing whether their families had survived, been captured, or been killed. After the war, many were relocated to orphanages where their names were changed or misplaced, making reunion impossible. A generation of children emerged from the war with fragmented identities, unable to trace their origins. Despite the overwhelming hardship, acts of kindness occasionally broke through the brutality. Elderly villagers shared the last pieces of food with wandering children. Soviet nurses risked their lives transporting wounded children across dangerous terrain. Some German soldiers, disillusioned with the war, quietly allowed children to pass checkpoints or tossed them small pieces of bread when officers were not looking. These rare gestures did not erase the cruelty of the occupation, but they became deeply etched in the memories of children who survived. By the end of 1941, as winter deepened and the German advance slowed, the situation for children remained dire. Starvation increased. Disease spread quickly because medical facilities were destroyed or overwhelmed. Children developed frostbite, infections, and illnesses that could not be treated. Families huddled together in ruined houses, trying to trap warmth with broken furniture and rags. The winter of 1941-1942 became one of the most devastating periods for children in Soviet history. Yet survival was not only physical, but emotional. Children formed deep bonds with one another because they understood each other's fears. They developed resilience that allowed them to endure long nights of hunger and days filled with responsibility. Many children later described how they learned to comfort younger siblings, ration scraps of food, or gather news from adults to prepare for possible dangers. These experiences shaped their adulthood, creating a generation marked by trauma, but also by extraordinary endurance. The war pushed every child into early maturity. They became caretakers, messengers, workers, and sometimes soldiers. They faced bombings, massacres, starvation, and displacement. They endured fear beyond what most adults experience in a lifetime. And yet many survived, carrying the memory of those years into old age and sharing their stories so the world would understand what childhood under Operation Barbarossa truly meant. Their stories reveal not only the cruelty of the Nazi invasion, but also the resilience of the human spirit, the strength of communities under pressure, and the lasting impact war has on the youngest and most vulnerable. Childhood in the Soviet Union during Barbarossa was not measured in games, education, or safety, but in endurance, courage, and survival. These children lived through one of the darkest chapters in human history, and their memories remain vital for understanding the true cost of war.